Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming. My name is Elizabeth Studley, and I'm from Michigan. So I have to say I'm grateful to be here in Houston where it's 70 degrees, because in Michigan, we just had that vortex you guys probably heard about, where one day it was negative 35 wind chill. And I remember I was walking into work, and it literally felt like I was like a He-Man type of figure, and it felt like all my joints were about to fall apart and break. And then 3 days later, it was 50 degrees. So not only am I glad to be here for the weather, I'm grateful that Dr. Paul asked me to come back and speak this year. I came in 2016, the inaugural year of M3, and I spoke on building a medical missions team. And this year, when they reached out to me, they asked me what I wanted to speak on. And I felt like God's been preparing me for this talk for a very long time. So this is the name of my talk. It's called Broken, Healed, and Now Shining God's Light. And I'm pretty sure that there's not a person in this room that hasn't been through a major life circumstance that has broken them in some kind of way. And healing is a tough process. And if we just allow God to start transforming us in our brokenness, we can find our purpose and destiny. And just like they shared last night with being able to meet Mother Teresa, when Don Stevens had that amazing opportunity to meet Mother Teresa, I feel like the thing that you guys should walk away from this weekend with is answering those 3 questions. Why were you born? What's your purpose? And those 2, knowing why you're born is one thing, and loving your family. But your purpose, that's a little bit difficult to find, but you can do that with prayer. And then being able to call and fulfill your destiny in this life, that's a whole nother journey. And I hope by the end of this talk that I'll have given you some pointers to be able to do that. So I'm going to share my testimony, how I got involved with medical missions, kind of the why behind what I do, the amazing things that God is doing in my life now that are just mind-blowing to me, and what you can do to find your calling. And this is a really grainy picture of my mom at 6 years old. Her name was Suzanne Harris, and I wouldn't be standing before you today without my mom. And the other little picture there is this doll that she got at 6 years old. My mom grew up in a very small town in Michigan called Michigan Center, Michigan. And at 6 years old, she got the only present that she had ever received in all her lifetime of growing up. They grew up on welfare. She moved 18 times. And this doll, she named it Elizabeth at 6 years old. And her grandfather, her father's father, was the chief of police in Michigan Center. And his child, which was my mother's father, was the misfit of the family, and he was known as the town drunk. And at 6 years old, my mom said she can remember sitting under the kitchen table, hunkered down, and holding onto this doll, which is her security blanket, while her dad chased her mom around the kitchen table with a butcher knife in a drunk fit. And she watched a lot of abusive things over those next few years until her father left the home when she was 8. And she said that through all those moves, through the 18 years, this doll, Elizabeth, was her comfort and her security blanket, because she didn't know where her next meal was coming from. She didn't know when the next move was coming. And she said even at 10 years old, she just wanted to have her dad's attention. And that there was 4, she grew up, there was 1 boy and she had 2 sisters. And her dad paid attention to her more than the other children. And she said at 10 years old, he took her to the bar. And she said he got so drunk that he couldn't drive. And so at 10 years old, she drove them home from the bar and got into a car accident. And her grandfather expunged that from her record. And she said that later on, as she was growing up, and her friends never met her father. And she said she was walking down the street with her friends, and they had just graduated from high school. And she looked down a side street, and there is her father getting pushed out of a bar, and he's vomiting, and he's drunk, and her friends are laughing. And she said, it just hurt me to the core, because they had no idea that was my dad. So she named this doll Elizabeth, and she said she promised God that if he ever gave her an Elizabeth, that she would give him back. And I guess that's me. So This next picture, this is my mom and dad on the left. My dad's name is Bert. He worked in a factory and made parts for the space shuttle. My mom was a licensed practical nurse who worked at the University of Michigan, and the two of them had the three of us. And the crazy thing is that my brother, who is on the top right, his name is Jim. Him and my sister, my baby sister Sarah, are 13 years apart. So it's like my mom said, she could only handle that pain of having childbirth every 7 years. And so my brother went off to college when my sister was 5. So it was like we had a segmented growing up. But the one thing that my parents instilled in us is that even though we were from a town of 1,100 people called Napoleon, Michigan, they told us there's nothing that we couldn't do without God's grace and his mercy on our life, and that we believe as big as we wanted to believe. And we did. This is the house I grew up in. It was a historic home, 150 years old. But this top right window was where my bedroom was. And I can remember after Sunday church and having our Sunday pot roast after church, and the whole house would be kind of quiet. I'd sit in that windowsill staring out through the trees, and I just knew that there was something more for me in this world, and that way beyond Napoleon, Michigan, and I just couldn't wait to get out and explore the world. And I would ask God, show me what you want me to do, because I know it's not in this town. And so this house was the foundation for everything that I was. Through middle school, I started realizing that I was a pretty good athlete, and even in the 5th grade, I won punt, pass, and kick for all the boys. I'm the only girl up there, and I won a trophy for that. And so I just love sports. Beyond going to church on Sundays and Wednesdays for Awana, sports was a big thing in our home. And football and basketball. I grew up when Michigan basketball won in '89, and the Pistons won the back-to-back in '89 and '90. And that's what we did for our free time. And so at 13 years old, I had a really big room in that house. And I had an 18-foot wall where I took my favorite Pistons player, Dennis Rodman, and then I also had another hero, and I took all the pictures out of the newspaper clippings, and I made the entire wall. It took probably a year and a half to make, but I made the entire wall of their clippings. And my mom took me. I got to meet Dennis Rodman and get his autograph. And my other hero, one day my mom came home from work at the hospital and said, "You're never going to believe it, but I met your hero." And I remember I was sitting in front of the TV. You remember how they used to say, don't sit too close to the TV? Well, I was only a few feet from it. And I just remember jumping up and screaming and jumping all over. And so I said, can I write him a letter? And she said, I think I'm going to see him on a regular basis because I'm training his girlfriend as a nursing student. And so the crazy thing was, I wrote him a letter. He wrote me one back. Imagine being in the 8th grade, and I framed it. You're going to school with a letter from one of the best athletes that's in the state of Michigan. And so here's a letter I have that says, "To Elizabeth." And I had told him in the letter that I thought I wanted to be a college basketball player. Like, that was my dream. I was such a tomboy. I wore sweats and a Just Do It sweatshirt from Nike almost every day to school with high tops. And so he wrote me this letter, and then he started calling our family. My mom kept seeing him at work. And he grew up in the South. And so he didn't have any family in Michigan. And over the next 4 years, he mentored me. I was getting really good. I was the MVP of multiple basketball camps. I'm now getting letters in the mail. And, at 16, I'm thinking, I'm the bomb.com, as the kids say today. I had everything all planned out. I was going to go play college basketball, and it was the summer before my senior year of high school, and I had gone to a couple of alcohol parties, and at that point, I worked at Subway as a Subway sandwich artist. Loved that job. But that second alcohol party I went to, I didn't make it home on time, and my mom told me, "You just bought yourself a ticket to mopping in the operating room this summer." And I said, "What does that mean?" She goes, "That means you're going to be in that car at 6:04 every morning, Monday through Friday, and you're going to ride to work with me. Tell Subway, give them your 2 weeks' notice." And I remember thinking that this is the last summer before my senior year, before I have to be an adult and responsible for the rest of my life. I told her she was ruining my life. But what I didn't know is that I thought I wanted to be an accountant at that time. And I went into the operating room, and I remember peering through the operating room doors, and I saw this lady that said nurse anesthetist on her badge. And I said, Mama, what is that? And she said, she's a nurse anesthetist. She gives anesthesia to all these kids. And I said, but I watched her all this week, and one day she was in orthopedics, and the next day neurosurgery, and then pediatric general surgery. I said, she gets to watch surgery for free every day and see every part of the body and take care of the babies and keep them alive. And so I told my mom, that's what I'm gonna be someday. And she said, girl, you are barely gonna make it through high school the way you're going. So at that point, at 16 years old, and I know at 16, most people don't know what they're gonna do for the rest of their life. I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so I was on a journey to get there. And basketball was a big part of what was gonna get me there. So this is me in July, before the fall of my senior year. You got your senior pictures taken. And this is one of the 3 portraits that I use. So I sent this out to all my classmates, and this girl thought she knew everything. And when I listened to this song by Mercy Me, it's called Dear Younger Me. Have you guys heard that song? And I think of her and how naive she was. And so I was still getting a bunch of letters in the mail for the college basketball. And now I'm 2 games into my season. I'm averaging 14 points and 10 rebounds a game. My name's on the announcements a lot. All the boys are thinking I'm awesome at school, and I thought so too. And so my hero that I told you about, that I got to meet when I was 13, he's now in the NFL. And he had 1 weekend out of 16 that he was off, where they get a bye weekend. And he called on Tuesday and said, I'm coming into town for the weekend. Why don't you come see me, and we'll come stay at one of your friends' house. Now, I used to go stay that summer before my senior year. I worked 3 to 11 in the hospital, so my mom let me go stay with one of her employees. Her name was Lori. She was like family to us. Lori had been to our house many times, spent the night, and she was like an adopted daughter to my parents. And so I called Lori and said, hey, my hero's coming in town. We're gonna hang out. Can we come to your house? And she was like, yeah, who doesn't wanna hang out with a pro athlete? And so I told my mom that instead of going to ride on the homecoming parade float, that I was gonna go hang out at Lori's. What I didn't tell her is that I was going to see my hero without her and my dad for the first time. So I'm all excited, I'm telling everybody at school, and I didn't eat for 2 days. And so now we get there, it's Friday night, hanging out. He bought some vodka. We go back to Lori's apartment. I think I'm a pro at drinking because I'd been to those 2 parties before my mom shut that down. And so we're playing quarters, where you bounce the quarter into the shot glass. And I wasn't very good at that. I'd never done it before. And I don't remember if it was 6 or 7 shots, but I had 6 or 7 shots of Studley's vodka within probably a half an hour time period. And you already know what that resulted in. I was so drunk. And I remember saying to the both of them, I'm gonna go to bed. And I was stumbling. I stumbled so much, I literally tripped over the lazy boy and kind of did the Superman and slid over the top and out the back of the lazy boy. And I went into Lori's room. Her roommate, Kelly, was gone for the weekend. So Kelly, they both shared a room. Kelly had a bed on the floor that was just the mattress and the box spring, and Lori's bed was up real high in the corner by the window. And so I got into Kelly's bed and I passed out. Next thing you know, I remember waking up vomiting, and I must have been loud enough in my vomiting that Lori came in to come check on me. And I remember laying there, and the vomit is just coming out of the side of my mouth. And it was all clear because I hadn't eaten for 2 days, no food, no nothing. And Lori, I remember her washing me with a cold washcloth and cleaning me up. I remember peering in the opening of the doorway, and the light from the living room was shining, and I could see my hero leaning against the doorway watching her clean me up. And so I passed back out. Lori said the both of them went out there. Now they're pretty drunk too. And he just asked if he could spend sleep for a few hours before his very long drive back home. And so Lori said they passed out. And the next thing I know, I wake up, and all I can see through that window over by Lori's bed, now the reflection from the parking lot light, this massive body is on top of me. And I'm waking up, and I'm trying to realize that my hero is now inside of me, and he is violating me in every way possible. And I remember thinking that I can't talk. I felt like I was trapped inside my own body, like my body was a shell. And I remember him picking me up, and my arms and legs were dangling like I was a doll with no motor control. And he took me over to Lori's bed and just flung me face down and violated me more. And then somehow I woke back up, back on Kelly's bed, and I woke up with the vomit in my hair and blood on the sheets and completely naked, and it was like 6 in the morning. And I went out and I talked to Lori, and I told her what happened, and their third roommate, Deanne, had come home in the meantime, and she said at 4:15 in the morning, she passed him going out to his car. And I just was sobbing, and I knew I had to get myself back together before I went home, because my mom and dad didn't even know he was there. They didn't know that was my whole purpose for going to Ann Arbor that night. And so I get home, and I'm trying to process everything at 17, the younger me. And I knew I didn't have a choice in that night, and that my virginity had been taken by my hero, somebody that had been in my life for 4 years, that was calling him monthly. My family was calling him son, my parents, and we were like a unit. He was my mentor. So not only I always thought of a rape was going to be a back alley rape by a stranger. I didn't think that it would be from somebody who had put into your life for 4 years and mentored you. And so now I'd already made plans before that weekend to go watch him play with my family the next weekend. And I remember telling my mom midweek that I didn't feel good and I didn't let's not go, because it was a long drive to get to where he was. And so I remember that Saturday morning. Now, mind you, in the midst of all this Me Too that we're seeing in the papers, and yes, there are people that make it up in their lies, and I don't know why they would do that, because they must have their own issues, but there are a bunch of us that are Me Too's that never told our story and never reported it, and I'm one of those. And I remember at 17, I thought to myself, if I tell, my mom and dad are going to sue him, and he's going to lose this big multi-million-dollar contract, and if I wouldn't have drank that night, he wouldn't have done that to me, and that I put myself in that position, and this is my fault for having gotten into that situation. And it was my fault that I gave him the opportunity to take my virginity. And maybe I would have said yes if he would have asked me, if I would have been awake, so if I wouldn't have drank. So everything I was putting on my own shoulders. So I didn't tell my parents. And that next Saturday, 8 days later after it happened, he called from the locker room like he would normally. That was a very frequent thing. And I remember answering the phone. He was like, I'm going to leave the tickets at will call. And I'm like, you think I'm still coming? I remember running down the hallway. I was in the kitchen, and my mom's right at the sink. And I remember trying to be quiet and running down the hallway with our long corded telephone. Those are no longer in existence. And I remember saying, what do you mean? I said, did you not think about what you did to me last week? I said, I didn't have a choice in this. And he was like, well, I'm leaving the tickets at the will call. And when I get down on one knee tomorrow and score that touchdown, no, that's for you. He said, I got to go. And he hung up. And so at 17, you're trying to process. Now, also in the mail, I get his jersey. He sends me his jersey with his name on it. And that next day, while my backside is still torn and throbbing, my family's watching his game like we did every week. And my dad, and he scored that touchdown, and he's down on one knee, and I'm thinking, there's millions of people watching this game, and now that's for me, and my brain's confused. I'm confused, because now my hero is telling, maybe it wasn't a rape. I didn't know what to think. But all I know is that my 17-year-old me start believing everything that you see on the screen. I was lost. I was a victim. I saw myself as a piece of meat like a rag doll and something for somebody to abuse. I became very self-destructive. I started smoking marijuana. The one thing that was a shining light in my life that whole senior year, while I packed on 30 pounds, and I remember, Ghostbusters had been out, and I felt like if I turned into the Marshmallow Man, that nobody would want to look at me and that they wouldn't want to hurt me. And all these things, I just was so broken, was what I was. And so I was applying to a nursing school. Like, I lost all my scholarships. I was applying to a nursing school at his alma mater. And I remember thinking that I want to get in on my own merit, not because they felt sorry for me that their former great player did this to me. And so I didn't tell anybody. And I got into that program. And so I just focused on that. And now fast forward, it's June. I'm just graduating from high school. My birthday is June 14th. My mom had my party on June 14th. So everybody had just left. I had a great graduation party. And my mom's sitting in my dad's brown lazy boy. And we're kind of spent from the party. And I'm like, have a glimmer of hope for my future. I'm about to go to this amazing nursing school. It's rated number 4 in the country. And so my mama puts her arms out, and I went to go sit on her lap like I did so many times. And she said, "Come here." And I sat on her lap. And I said, "Mama, are you ready to know?" Because that whole 9 months, she'd been asking me, "What is wrong with you?" And I remember when we were laying in front of the Christmas tree, she even asked me if he raped me. She knew something was wrong, because I went from being the class clown, the girl who came home from school every day saying I had the best day ever, and my mom and my brother would laugh at me because they were like, "Was it better than yesterday?" And I'm like, "Yes, it was better than yesterday. Every day was the best day ever." And I lost those best days ever. And my mom kept asking me what was wrong. And I went from being Miss Popular, Miss Basketball, to being shelled up in my room those whole 9 months. So I'm sitting on her lap in that chair. And I said, "Mama, are you ready to know?" And now I'm 18, and I knew I'd done my homework. And I knew that it would be my choice to prosecute him once I turned 18. And so I told her that night I went to Lori's house, that he raped me in every way possible. And that I was just so broken. And she was so upset, and she felt so guilty because she introduced me to him. And she told my dad and my brother. And I remember my dad is such the most kind, gentle person. And my dad went and got a shotgun. And him and my brother, who was 23, they were going to head down to find him. They didn't know exactly, they just knew the town he was in. I don't know if they were going to go to the office of where he played or what, but I remember my daddy was taking off in his green and white F-150, and I'm holding on to the mirror of his door with my shoes and skidding he's not going very fast, but I'm holding on and his window's down, and I just said, "Daddy, please don't go. It can't change what happened, and you can go to jail if you try to hurt him." And my dad stopped, and we just tried to process how this man who was like our family would do this to me. And those next 4 years of college, I don't know how I made it through. Well, actually, I do. It was by God's grace. And I just knew when I was taking care of patients and learning and loving people that I got to be like my authentic self. I got to love people. I got to love on them. And I got to see that by me helping them, it was helping me. But as soon as I left those hospital walls, it was like an erector set of brick would come up to protect me, because I didn't know who was going to be the next person to hurt me. And I couldn't fathom the fact that somebody would stay in your life for 4 years with the intention of raping you. And so it was like I lived this double life. I'd get out of school in clinical, and I'd go smoke weed, trying to escape the pain. But guess what? Every time I came back down from that high, it was still there. All those words I believed about myself were still there. So I finished nursing school by the grace of God. At one point I was had a 2.4, and I was on probation. And then I got into this ICU clinical and met this lady named Maureen Thompson, who I still get to see today. And I tell her, do you know that you were a pivotal person in my life? That ICU clinical, I finally found my passion. And I knew I loved it. And that was my beginning of my junior year, and I got a 3.7 ever since. And finished with a 2.9. And so when I look at this picture, this is like a metaphor of my life's journey. The roads that you see and the ups and downs, that was me living a life of fear, a life of deceit and destruction and all those negative words I believed about myself. And when I graduated from nursing school, I knew that I needed to get into therapy, and I knew that my self-destructive ways and how I was treating every man that crossed my path except for my daddy. I was trying to punish them for what one man did to me, and I knew it wasn't right. And I remember praying to God and asking him, just don't give up on me, because I know I love you, but this is a tough thing for me to process. And so, like this picture, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step, and that was prayer. And so I finished nursing school, and I would start praying to God, but I was still pretty messed up, still smoking pot, still living that double life. And when I was 26, I come home, and on my answering machine voicemail is my rapist hero, a message. He's been in therapy, and he wants to apologize to me. He's coming into Detroit next weekend. Would I consider meeting with him? And at 26 years old, 9 years after that rape, and I'm still thinking this has still such a profound impact on my life. Why not meet him? It's not like he can rape me again, you know, and maybe I'll get some healing out of this. So I go to the Marriott in Troy, Michigan, where they were staying, and I meet with him for an hour and a half. And he tells me that his aunt, who raised him a lot, started abusing him when he was 6 years old. And she raped him repeatedly. And he's in therapy, and he's trying to apologize to myself and the other victims. And not one of them turned him in. There were 6 other girls, he said. And so by the end of that conversation, I said, did you stay in my life for those 4 years to rape me? And this sent me into another tailspin. He said, I knew the first time I saw you at 13 that I was going to rape you. The whole reason I stayed in your life and got to be friends with your family was because I knew you were such a tomboy and he goes, you didn't even realize that when you were 14, 15, and 16, I would ask you little questions to see if you had a boyfriend, to see if you were sexually active. And he said, I knew I was going to rape you from that very first day, and I did stay in your life for 4 years with that intention. And that sent me into another tailspin. And I just couldn't believe, I looked at every man like an enemy, that somebody would do that. And now I'm 26, I still have that dream to be a nurse anesthetist. So I'm applying to school, I get into school, and my mama kept telling me in between school, and while I was working for those 5 years, you need to go to therapy. And I said, Mama, I'm not ready to deal with this. I want to go to school and finish. And part of not only did I want to be a nurse anesthetist, the one thing that also was driving me is that I never wanted to be in a situation with a man, if I had children, if something bad started happening or he was abusing us, that I couldn't leave and take care of myself and my children. That was another reason to be a nurse anesthetist. And so I finished school with flying colors, and I was living the life that I dreamed of. I'm a nurse anesthetist, and I work at the University of Michigan at the Children's Hospital where my mama walked for those same hallways for 30 years. And I am working at Henry Ford Hospital where I trained in anesthesia, doing huge trauma cases. And I'm not realizing that later on God's going to use those 2 places as a big part of what he had planned for me. And so I finished anesthesia school, and I start going to therapy every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. For 53 straight Wednesdays, that woman took me from the first day that giddy 13-year-old who found out she got to meet her hero, through all those 4 years and all the bonding and the mentorship that went on through that night of the rape. And then by the end, my very last session, I wrote him a letter. And I told him I was tired of carrying this sack and that I was giving it to him metaphorically through this letter. And I sent that letter. I kept my underwear and that Studley's vodka. And that day, I put those in the therapist's garbage. And I felt a sense of healing that I had never felt. And she helped me process this rape through not my 17-year-old eyes, through a professional's eyes. And I saw things that I'd never thought of before. And so part of this journey of healing was also having faith in God. And I knew that there was something else for me, because I'd be at work every day and I'd have the best day ever. And I'd get out of work and I was still chasing that same fulfillment in my personal life that I had at work. And it didn't matter how many girls' trips I went on. One of my friends is here now. I used to go with her on trips and we'd have a great time, but I still didn't get that fulfillment that I had when I was at work. And I kept asking God to show me, what am I supposed to be doing? And so in the midst of all this therapy, one of my very close friends, who is like one of my earthly spiritual mentors, told me I needed to start praying for my hero. And I said, oh, that's asking a lot. And with a genuine heart. And so I started doing that. And the more I started doing that, I was feeling even a more sense of fulfillment and peace in my life. And slowly those words I started believing about myself were being shed. And then after I started, on my birthday, that very next birthday, I decided to spend my whole birthday with God. And I shut my cell phone down. I got out all my journals from high school through college and up to the current moment, and I read them all. And I read that 17-year-old's thought process. And I couldn't believe my growth and how I'd grown. And through my 20s, the terrible things I was writing and the destructive things I was doing to myself and to others. And after that day I spent with Jesus, at the end of the day, I had this dry erase board. And on the left side, I wrote down all those words that you saw on the previous slide that I used to believe about myself. And on the right side, I felt like I could almost audibly hear him say that these are the things I believe about you, that I want you to believe about yourself from this day forward. And that Elizabeth means consecrated to God. And that my mama at 6 years old already preordained through God that I was going to do something great for his honor. That I was not a victim, I was a victor. I'm empowered. I'm a nurturer like I am at school and at work and at my job. And I'm full of peace for the first time in my life. And I finally get to live in my authentic self. And so I go to church, and the very next week, I say, okay, God, show me what you want me to do. And I got to backtrack 1 second, though. And as I'm feeling all those things about myself, I'm on my way home from Henry Ford one day. It's actually May 7th, 2007. And all 3 lanes come to an abrupt stop while I'm driving. And I remember that there was a semi behind me. And I looked in my rearview mirror, and all I could see was that man's gray hair. And I remember thinking, did I have enough time to put it in reverse and go in the ditch? I'm literally a quarter mile from my exit ramp. And I didn't. He was coming. He didn't even see that everybody had stopped. And in that moment, I remember literally saying out loud through my sunroof, okay, God, it's just you and I. Tell me what to do. And I thought, this might be my last words on earth. And I've never heard a male voice or any voice in my lifetime. But in that moment, I heard my guardian angel say, tuck your chin and cross your arms across your chest. And as soon as I did, that 17-ton semi slammed into the back of me. And I was now a 7-car pileup with 5 cars in front of me. And as I'm laying there, and I'm looking through the sunroof, and my body had hit so violently that I pulled my chair off the track that I was on, and now my chair is against the second row of seats. My hand is 18 inches from the steering wheel. That semi-engine is about 1.5 feet from my head. I can remember feeling the heat singeing the back of my hair, and I'm laying there with my head like this, and my arms are numb. My fingertips are numb, but I remember thinking, at least I can feel them. And now Diet Coke is raining from the ceiling. And I remember sticking my tongue out and got a little dribble. And I remember laughing and saying, okay, God, I'm still here. And now all this chaos is going on outside my car window. The ambulance is pulling up. And the man in front of me that's in front of a tiny car, they're pulling him out. And his legs are dangling by a thread, and there's blood everywhere. And I remember thinking that, God, I know I just witnessed a miracle because this semi is 1.5 feet from my head, and this man's life is forever changed. He may never walk again, let alone, I don't know if he's gonna even live through this moment. It was like a mass of blood. And I said, show me why you have me here. What is my purpose? And my sister is a lawyer. She came and got me. I said, I'm fine. I'm fine. She's like, no, I'm taking you to the emergency room. So I go to the University of Michigan to the emergency room. And I get neck films. I get CAT scans, a film on my knee because my knee crushed into the dashboard. And I felt fine, but it's still not registering that I shouldn't be alive or walking. And so I'm sitting on this exam table, waiting in a room by myself, waiting for the attending surgeon to come in, who's my coworker's husband. And Dr. Kroenig walks in, and I had a neck brace on like Aunt Esther wore on Sanford and Son. So he said, can I have that neck brace for my residents for teaching? And I'm like, sure. And he took it off, and he's standing 3 feet in front of me, and he said, do you know I've been an attending surgeon or attending ER physician for 18 years. He said, you were the first person in 18 years that has walked in and walked out of my emergency room unscathed from a semi. He said, you should not be here right now. He said, I need you to hop off this table, Elizabeth, and go figure out what you're supposed to do with your life because this is against all odds. And that kind of resonated with me, like, whoa, this is, a lot of great things have happened in my life, and I feel like I've gotten a lot of favor and privilege from God, but this is off on the Richter scale here. And so I go to church that next week. I say, okay, God, show me what you want me to do. So they start this program with my church with the local orphans in Metro Detroit and foster care kids. And I'm like, okay, that's it. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. So I go to the meeting. I start doing all this stuff. And I'm realizing, just like this says, that God often uses our deepest pain as the launching pad of our greatest calling. And so the church, for whatever reason, stopped working with the orphans. And I loved it. We'd go do quarterly birthday parties, and I'd play bingo with the kids. And they lived in this, like it was Orphan Annie. It was a big dorm room, and they had single beds. And they'd put our bingo cards and have us autograph them and tape them above their bed, and it was like such a meaningful experience to them. I couldn't even appreciate what that might be like when you don't have parents or somebody to love you. And so when the church said that they weren't doing that partnership anymore, I said, I'm going to continue it. And so for the next 10 years, from 2007 to 2017, those 2 hospitals I work at, I would send out a mass email to my coworkers and say, would you like to sponsor an orphan or a foster care child for Christmas and for their back-to-school supplies? And so every year, we'd raise enough back-to-school supplies for 250-plus children, and we'd raise over $25,000 worth of gifts for their Christmas presents. And so this is what I thought God's plan was for me, was these orphans. Little did I know that my coworker was going to ask me to go on a mission trip with her to Kenya. And we go do anesthesia for a couple days and go on safari for 2.5 days. And all I could see was, okay, anesthesia sounds great. We go do surgery in Kenya. All I could see was Benny Irwin on National Geographic and me in my hat and taking all these great pictures. And I thought it was going to be a one-time trip, like check it off the list, another trip with the girls. And what I didn't know, that on that trip I was going to meet my mentor, Steve James, who was the founder of Kenya Relief, and that I would be on a van with him. And this is one of those preordained meetings that God has us that we don't even know we're going to be on. And that this man would, end up changing my life. And that purpose, that fulfillment I was searching for outside of work, I found it. And so Kenya Relief does all these great things. They have this surgical and medical clinic called the Brase Clinic, and they treat patients And they have an orphanage that has 170 plus kids at. And there's a pastor on site, and these kids are getting baptized and learning about Jesus in the midst of them being orphans. And they're learning to be loved and in that, soaking in that love from all these people that love them. And so I went on that first trip, and I came home, and I started telling everybody I could at Henry Ford and the University of Michigan about this. And I always laugh and say, it's hard enough to get somebody to meet you for lunch next week in your own town, 10 minutes away, let alone get 600 people to come to Kenya with you on a mission trip 8,000 miles away. And so this is how I know it was all God. And he used that big mouth he gave me and the girl who had the best day ever to start soliciting people. And we have now, I've led 19 medical surgical mission trips with Kenya Relief. And we have treated over, each team sees about 500 patients. And so collectively, almost 7,000 medicine patients have been treated by our teams and more than 1,100 surgeries. And these are all my friends and colleagues, and it's an amazing feeling. And this is me and my colleague, Isabella, and working in Kenya at Magori, at Kenya Relief, and we're changing the lives of these patients. In the midst of changing their lives, our lives are changed too, and it's the most amazing, soul-filling feeling I've ever had. And I could have never dreamed that this is what God's plan was for me. I thought it was going to be a one-and-done trip, and I was wrong. So the why behind what I do, I realized that in the midst of giving back to those orphans and feeding the homeless in Ann Arbor and Detroit and serving in Kenya, that God had healed me to a whole new level past that therapy. My brokenness was now resolved, and I was mended by helping other people. And God took my life-changing moments and combined them with all the greatest gifts that he gave me so that I could fulfill the calling he placed on my life. And since that day in that car, when that semi was sitting behind me, and I prayerfully asked him to show me, boy, did he show me. And he's going to do the same for you guys. And I remember thinking that I was kind of scared. What is he going to show me? And am I going to be able to do it? And am I going to have to make huge sacrifices to do it? I'd do it all over again. And guess what? What he has planned for you is going to fit right into your life. He's going to use all those talents he already gave you to do it, and you're going to love every minute of it. And the unexpected blessings from this little girl from Napoleon, Michigan, that grew up in a town of 1,100, is Steve and I got to meet the First Lady of Kenya, Margaret Kenyatta. And not only that, when Steve and he comes to Michigan quite a bit, and we were driving down the highway one day, and he said, Elizabeth, you're the one. Sorry for the Alabama accent. And I said, what one, Steve? And he was like, God told me you're the one. When it's time for me to retire, I want you to take this presidency and run Kenya Relief. And I never dreamed that that's what God was going to call me to. And that when I was looking out that window in that of the home I grew up in and longing for something greater in somewhere in the world, that it was going to be to Kenya. But I love it. And so when he told me that, I felt like, ooh, I'm in a tiny box in anesthesia. I need to do something to become more knowledgeable about hospital administration and global health. So I enrolled in this doctorate program through Central Michigan University. And I just got to go in July to the UN in the World Health Organization in Geneva and spend 5 days. And they invited me to come for a month mentorship when I finish getting toward the end of the program. And I really think that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And so for you, what can you do to find your calling? You got to pray about it, and you got to ask him. You got to ask him what you're supposed to be doing, and you trust him with whatever he reveals to you. You have to have faith. That slide that showed all the highways and the ups and downs, that's the faith, the path of fear. When you have the path of faith, it's an upward climb. And along the way, as you have more and more faith with God, he's going to start blessing you and giving you more and more favor. He's going to give you resources to do every single thing he has for you to do. and you ask yourself those greatest gifts and talents that you do most easily, he's going to utilize all of those. And like Lauren said last night, she might not have the IB skills, but he's going to grow you in new ways and give you new skills that you're going to need for this journey. And you're going to live out your purpose, and you're going to be full of peace in living in your destiny and fulfilled beyond compare. And for we are all his handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, in which God prepared us in advance to do. And the last thing, as I stand up here, is this doll. It signifies my mama's journey, and to an extent, my journey. And in October 4th of 2016, after I left M3 the first time, I'm getting an award from the Wellspring people for all my work with the orphans and the foster care kids in front of 400 people. And my mama's sitting over at that table, and she stands up at the end. She was loud and boisterous. For his honor and his glory. And I said, yes, Mama, for his honor and glory. The next morning, she left me a voicemail like she did every day while I was at work. And she said, guess what? When I promised God I was going to give you back to him at 6 years old, she said, that's a tough thing for a parent to do, but I did it. She said, you're not my child. You are God's child, and I couldn't be more proud of you. And what I didn't know is that my mama was going to die in her sleep that night. And I am carrying out what she and God ordained for me. And I hope you leave this conference with the same thing, and that you carry out what you're supposed to be doing, because you're going to love it. Thank you for your time.